Hey there, I want to thank you so much for joining in. It truly is a blessing to have you be part of what we are doing here at our church, even if it's remotely for our week today. This week, we're going to be diving in once again to our core values. And today's message we begin looking at your identity. And by identity, I'm asking you the question, how do you describe yourself? And if we were to sit down and have that conversation, you would probably begin with your family origins. You would start telling me about your parents. You would tell me about your siblings. You would tell me about where you grew up. And I would respond probably with something similar to this. Those things are not your choice. When you're younger, you don't have a choice, obviously, of who your parents are or where you live. And that would be something that we would describe as your DNA, who your family is, and your parents and that sort of thing. But can I tell you this? Your parents do not determine your DNA. God does. And I think it's important for us to really understand that it is God who determines who we are. And I say that because some people need to be reminded and need to hear that you are not an accident. You were on God's mind before he began his work of creating this universe. You were on his mind. God thought about you. And when he thought about you, the Bible tells us that he delighted in you. I would encourage you, when we're done here today, and maybe sometime this week, for you to open up your Bible to Psalm chapter 139 and read that entire chapter. I would encourage you to read it through several times, because it truly is the way that God thinks about us and how God interacts with us as his people. It truly is a very encouraging chapter. So back to your identity and your story. You'll tell me about your life after high school. You'll tell me if you went to college. You might even tell me about your job, and it will be easy for me to understand whether you really like your job or not. You'll tell me about your friends. If you don't, I'll probably ask, because I know that who you are is a reflection of who you spend the most time with. Your life is impacted most by the people you hang out with and the books you read. In fact, recent research is revealing that your brain synchronizes with others, that you begin to think, act, and even potentially begin to look. Your outward appearance begins to look like those that you spend the most time with. So who do you spend the most time with? Who do you hang around the most? We're going to jump into our live message here now at our location, Celebrate Church in Missoula. But before we do so, can I just encourage you, be in prayer and maybe even begin to make plans about for sure attending our services on Easter. We're looking for where we're going to have that service. We're probably going to have it off-site. But if you don't know yet where you're going to be or if you're going to even attend church, March 31st, it's the very last day, and the very last Sunday of March is Easter Sunday. We will be celebrating our 3rd year anniversary. It truly is so exciting and such a blessing to be a part of the community here in Missoula. If I can do anything for you as your pastor, please reach out to me. I'd be honored to have a conversation with you, know how I could pray for you, and be involved in your life. Now here's the message. If you don't, I might ask, because I know that who you are is impacted most by the friends you have and the books you read. Did you know that? There's actually scientific proof of this. Have you ever heard of neural synchronization? Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. I knew about the concept, but I didn't know about it until this week. Here is what neural synchronization means. And James right now is geeking out right now. But listen, you've probably heard the phrase that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. There's scientific proof for that. Scientific research actually supports this, but even in a more significant way. It's called neural synchronization. This research is revealing that your brain literally synchronizes with people who you hang around the most. Isn't this interesting? This is so fascinating to me. You begin to think, you begin to act, and cases are even showing that your outward appearance, what you look like, begins to be affected and changed by those that you hang around the most. Some of you need some new friends. I'm sorry. That was so not right. I had in my notes, I'm now accepting applications for those who want to up their game, but it came out that way, Noah, so I'm sorry. But listen, let's back to your story. Back to your story. After you tell me about your parents and the life you're creating and your friends, well, if you trust me enough, you might tell me a little bit about your desired future, your preferred future. You will share with me what you want to do for the rest of your life. It's been said that the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why. The day you were born and the day you figure out why. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Turn to your neighbor, and you can leave the year out. Okay, the year, not important, but tell them your birthday. All right? Turn to someone and tell them your birthday. All right. Now, here's the next thing I want you to do. Don't tell someone, but at least think about this. Whether you write it down, whether you put it in your phone or in your notes, what is your purpose? What's your purpose? I'm going to suggest some things that might be true about what you're thinking about at this very moment. Most of us, perhaps all of us, equate purpose with success. And so how you define success will influence what you determine, what you desire for your purpose to be. And so to define your purpose, you'll also think about how you want to see yourself. And we're all let me just be vulnerable with you, because I think we're all probably true of this in some way or other. All of us are just insecure enough about who we are that we include in that thought process the appearance of having it all together, of being successful, of having the preferred future, so that others might be impressed when they look at us. Is that fair? And can I encourage you with something for the next moment or two? The sooner you get rid of that pressure, the motive to do things to impress other people, you're actually on your way to the preferred life. Why is it that the very people we want to impress, oftentimes we care the least about? We don't even like them. Why is that? So, be free. Set yourself free. Who cares what other people think about you? We already know what God thinks about you. That should be enough. The opposite, though, of living for others is not to live for yourself. You might be thinking, well, if I'm not to be living to impress others, then the answer must be to live for myself. That's not the best way to live life, church. You're wondering what's the other option. There is one, and I'm going to be sharing that with you the rest of our time this morning. We've been looking at our core values the past couple of weeks. And today we're looking at our fourth core value. Would you say the word purpose? Purpose. It's what you live for. Most people live only for what matters to them. By the way, they tend to be some of the most miserable people on planet Earth. When you are the center, when every decision, every plan, every dollar that you spend is all about what makes you happy, do you know that you will never be happy? J.D. Rockefeller, one of the most wealthiest men that ever lived, one day he was asked this question: how much is enough? How much does it take to make a man happy? You know what his response was? Just one more dollar. In other words, money alone does not produce a satisfied life. So what does? When you live your life on purpose, and that purpose is found outside of yourself, that can lead to a rich and a very satisfying life. I invite you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. We're going to read a classic story. It's one of my favorite stories with Jesus and his disciples. And we're going to begin reading with verse 22. Let's read. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake, while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land. They were in what? They were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3:00 in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. This story encourages me. It's one of those "I wish I was there" moments. Anyone else? Let's just unpack this for just a moment. Just a moment. You have the 12 disciples in a boat. They're all in the boat. Okay? 4 of these disciples, you have Peter and Andrew, James and John, are seasoned fishermen. So 1/3 of the disciples, they're very, very, very familiar with boats and the Sea of Galilee. You get the picture? Okay? They're very familiar with this. And they're in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And what's happening? Storm. Now, it's not the kind of storm or rain like we've had in Missoula the last couple of days. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, if you have never been to Seattle, you just experienced it in the winter. That's Seattle in the winter. All right? A little less rain is Portland. A little more bizarre people living there, but a little less severe rain. Okay? That's the Pacific Northwest. I can say that because I lived for 14 years in Oregon, just outside the I-5 corridor. It's just like that all winter long. Somebody turned the sun off and then turns it back on sometime around June 1st. All right? That's just the way it is. This is not that kind of rain. I know that because it says the disciples were terrified. There must have been an incredible amount of wind. And when you get wind on a lake, what happens? Big waves, right? And then there's thunder and lightning. This is all happening. And then sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning, as if all this wasn't bad enough, there's this ghost that starts walking toward them. They have reason to be concerned. They have reason to be freaking out, if you will. Because this is not a normal moment. Let's go back to how I started this morning. I asked you the question, what's your identity? And I'd like for us to take just a moment and look at Peter. Peter. I've already told you that he was a fisherman. So let me tell you a little bit more. If you ever did a study on Jewish culture, you would learn this about young boys. Young boys learn the family trade. And so Peter grew up with a father who was a fisherman. And so Peter spent time in a boat. He learned the tricks and the tools of the trade. He understood what it meant to go fishing, and he learned how to use a net, and he learned how to mend a net. They didn't use fishing poles back then. They used nets. Because you use a net and you throw it over the edge of the boat and you let it sink down, and then you grab that net and you pull it back in, and you don't get just one fish. You get lots of fish. That's my kind of fishing. I'm all in for that. I mean, yours is pretty cool. Ask Mason about his fishing story, and it's real and it's amazing. But this is a different kind of story. They were traveling across, but here's Peter. He's a fisherman, and so his family, his father, was a fisherman as well. That's his identity. James and John are in the boat with him as well. James and John, when we read about the calling of Jesus and the disciples, after Jesus called Peter, James and John were very close. And so I get the impression that James and John were friends of Peter and Andrew, who were brothers as well. So they're in the boat as well. Peter's friends are in the boat with him. Do you get the picture? And if fishing is your occupation and you're in the boat, what are you doing when you're in the boat fishing? You're making money, right? You following me? And so your finances are tied up to your identity, which is the boat. Your family is tied up to your identity. Your father taught you how to fish. Your friends are in the boat. They understand this as well. Peter's identity, who he sees himself as, is very closely related to the boat that he's in right now. Do you understand what I'm saying? You tracking with me? Mm-hmm. This is important. If you haven't experienced a storm in life, you haven't lived long enough. Because storms tough circumstances, difficult seasons, they're going to happen to you. They will. Let me give you some examples. Some friend will betray you. You'll go to work in the morning and not have a job at the end of the day. The politicians who run the country you live in, some of them are going to make decisions you won't like. Maybe it's your parents that decide to move to another state and you don't want to go with them. You're going to get some disease, or your spouse will decide they no longer want to be married to you. You're going to wake up in the middle of the night and there will be a storm happening. And your identity, church, who you are, is about to become challenged. You all right? You okay? So we have the disciples on a boat during a storm, and Jesus has arrived. He's walking on the water. Can you just imagine that? Peter sees Jesus. And then Jesus tells Peter and the rest of the disciples not to be afraid. Don't miss what Jesus is saying to the disciples. Don't miss this. But that's not all he says. He tells his disciples not to be afraid. Why? Because he's here. That's what he says. He says, don't be afraid. Take courage because I'm here. And so this is a lesson, church, that every one of us needs to hear and learn. That no matter what storms are happening, when you have Jesus, when you have Jesus, the proper response is what? Courage. Just say that word. Say courage. I love that word. I absolutely love courage. Turn to your neighbor and say, take courage. Now, some of you need to say it again because I'm not so sure. I mean, some of you are like, take courage. No. Take courage. Live boldly. That's right. Listen, I want to let you know this. It's been a while since I said this, but courage is actually one of our core values. It's not written on any of our core values, but it's one of our core values. And here's the reason why it's one of our core values. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you love Jesus with all your heart, and you know that he loves you, part of the DNA of a Christian is courage. There is nothing that you have to be afraid of, church. If Jesus is on your side, that's a good place to be. No matter what storms are happening, no matter how big the waves, no matter how loud the thunder or bright the lightning, it's okay. And if there's a ghost coming towards you, there's a real good probability that it's Jesus. So you might as well just jump out of the boat and start walking towards him anyway. Because if you have Jesus, you have nothing to be afraid of. Amen. Nothing. Unless they're coming for you. So Peter courageously tells Jesus to call him out of the boat. And for the sake of reminding you, that boat represents everything about Peter's identity. His family origins, the family business, his financial well-being, his friends. And he left them all and stepped out of the boat. Now, why am I pointing that out? Because there are moments in our life that define us. Storms, those difficult moments, are opportunities meant to teach us something about ourselves and something about God. Peter is getting one of those opportunities. He's walking on the water away from his identity. Do you see that? He's walking away from the boat. He's left that. He's left his origins. He's left his friends. He's left the financial security that is wrapped up in that boat. And he's walking towards Jesus. Which brings me to the next question. Who or what do you trust the most when the unexpected happens? Who or what do you trust the most? What brings you strength? What gives you confidence that no matter what, no matter how difficult it gets, courage as a follower of Jesus Christ is the only option. And so that's the option I choose. Peter left the boat. He walked away from his identity. But he isn't just walking away from something. Do you see what else is going on? Who is he walking towards? Don't miss this. Because as a follower of Jesus Christ, each one of us has a new identity. Come on. Is that not good news? Every one of us who follow Jesus Christ, every one of us who have surrendered ourselves and have chosen to follow Jesus Christ, we have a new identity, and it's found in Jesus. You and I, who follow Jesus, are children of God. We're sons and daughters of God. That's what it says here. Which makes Jesus who? My brother. He's my brother. That's a good place to be. We've been given an incredible gift that salvation is just one part of, but it doesn't tell the whole story. I want you to write down somewhere the reminder to read Ephesians chapter 1 this week. Ephesians chapter 1. It's one of my favorite chapters in all the Bible. Because starting in verse 3, Paul goes into great detail about all the blessings that are mine as a follower of Jesus Christ. And they're all mine. None of them are excluded. And here's what's absolutely interesting. I just learned this past week something about verses 3 through 14. They're one sentence, which is grammatically incorrect. It should not be that way. But they're one sentence for a reason. Because Paul is wanting you to pay attention. And so he's writing in a different way. And he's actually breaking grammar rules. Paul's a pretty smart guy. But he's breaking grammar rules because he wants you to see something going on in these verses. 11 verses, that's one sentence. And there are all these blessings that are ours as followers of Jesus Christ. If you want a shot in the arm, if you want something to encourage you, to give you hope, to just help you walk a little taller and walk a little prouder, read those verses and you will recognize how much God is in love with you. And all of the amazing things that God has made possible to you as being a follower of Jesus Christ. It's all wrapped up in our new identity. And as part of that new identity is our purpose. Purpose. Now I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 22. This is what your purpose is. If you wrote this down, way to go. Verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap Jesus with this question. How silly would that have been? Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The most important thing you can do with your life is love God. There is nothing that matters more than that. That's what Jesus is saying. It's more important than getting an education. It's more important than being on the right career path. It's more important than who you marry. It's more important than who your friends are or how you invest your money. Nothing matters more. That's your purpose. Period. It's why you were created. You were created because God wanted someone to love. And it was his desire that you and I learn to love him back. And so, write this down. Love trusts and love obeys. It's very simple. Love trusts and love obeys. Here's how I know that. Let's go back to our story. Jesus called Peter out of the boat. And what did Peter do? It says he went over the boat. I just kind of imagine him kind of falling out of the boat. Just kind of falling out. And instead of splish splash, I was taking a bath, it's like he hit and it was like concrete almost, right? I mean, because he didn't go down. And he pushes himself up and he starts walking towards Jesus. Why? Because love trusts. It trusts God enough to obey. Love trusts God enough to obey. That's how you know if you truly love God more than anything else in your life. You want to know? If you want to know, do I really love God with all of my heart, soul, and strength? Do you obey? Do you obey? That's how you know. Obeying God is always in your best interest. Unfortunately, we justify disobedience. Please never forget that disobedience, not obeying God, do you know what it's called? Sin. Partial obedience is still disobedience. When you love God, you put him above you. And you know what you do? You jump ship. And as a parent, there is nothing more important that you can teach your children than to obey God and to love him with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Teach them many important things, but make sure you get that one right. Because nothing else matters like this one. And it's why I think Jesus takes Peter back to the boat. Did you notice that? What did they do? Peter starts looking around at the waves and he starts doubting, he starts sinking. What does Jesus do? He reaches out, he grabs him by the hand, and then they go back to the boat. Here's why I'm bringing this up. Can you imagine the conversation? Can you imagine the other disciples? First of all, aren't they probably a little jealous? I would be. I'd be insanely jealous. I'd be like, Jesus, go back out. Let me try it. My turn. I would be. I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen. But imagine the conversations. Imagine Peter saying, you guys should have done that too. It was amazing. It was like nothing I've ever experienced. And I learned something this moment on this day. that when Jesus calls you out of the boat, don't hesitate. Run towards him. And when you're in the storm with Jesus, nothing should shake your confidence. Nothing should take away your confidence or your courage. Because if Jesus is with you, it doesn't matter what's happening in your life. It doesn't matter what kind of storms you're experiencing. It doesn't matter how big the waves are and if they're splashing you in your face and if lightning is just around the corner and you know the science of lightning and water. I was in a lake one time fishing in an aluminum boat and a storm came up and there was lightning happening and we couldn't get that boat to land quick enough. Because we understand if lightning hits that lake, the whole water is a conduit and it's going to head straight towards our aluminum fishing boat. So we got out of that boat as quickly as we could. Peter got out of the boat too, but only to run towards Jesus. And I think when he and Jesus made it back to the boat, there was a pretty amazing conversation happening. And the other disciples learned an incredible, valuable lesson. Here's the lesson. Here's the lesson, church. Don't trust your identity before Jesus. When it comes to storms, your parents, they may have taught you the right thing, but there's something greater than your identity. Don't trust your finances. Dear Lord, don't trust your finances. You may be stable. You may have figured things out right. You may be disciplined and set yourself up for a preferred future financially. But none of that matters as much as your relationship with the Lord. None of it matters. Who you are with Jesus is what you should run towards whenever you're facing difficult moments. Now I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Old Testament. This is moments before the Israelite people are going to be heading into the promised land. Moments before Moses dies. He's led the people for 40 years. They're standing on the edge of the promised land. And Deuteronomy literally means second sermon. Second sermon, second message. He's given it to them again. Chapter 6, verse 4. Listen, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Does this sound familiar? And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. That kind of sums up a day, right? Does it not? Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The Lord your God will soon bring you into the land he swore to give you when he made a vow to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is a land with large, prosperous cities that you did not build. The houses will be richly stocked with goods you did not produce. You will draw water from cisterns you did not dig, and you will eat from vineyards and olive trees you did not plant. When you have eaten your fill in this land, be careful not to forget the Lord who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him only. So, when Jesus answered the expert in the law and said, the first and greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Do you know that he was actually repeating a commandment that every good Jew quoted twice a day. They memorized this when they were a child. It's this phrase, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind." And they would say that twice a day. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your strength." And the command is this. If you're a parent, tell your children. If you're not a parent, tell those that are important to you in your life that this is how you should live your life. Does that make sense? That's your purpose. Love God. Love Him with all that you are. Sure, teach your children other things, but don't neglect this one. Make sure you get this one right. Make sure your children understand who you love and who you serve with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, because they're watching. They're going to see mom and dad's words line up with what they're doing throughout the day. Tell your friends. There's no greater thing in life. There's nothing greater you can do in life than to love Jesus Christ with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is your purpose. That is our purpose. Love God and love others. God, I'm grateful for this story. I'm grateful for many reasons. One reason right now that I'm thinking of is that there are times that every one of us will face in life that are difficult. And in those moments, we have a choice. Do I listen to God or do I listen to the voices in this world? Because the voice of God says, take courage, don't be afraid. But the voices in the world will tell us that, how can you trust in a God that allows you to go through that? Or what have you done to prepare for these types of things? I'm encouraged because I have not only read this in your word, but I have experienced it in my life. That no matter what I am facing, you are facing it with me. That I'm not facing it alone. That I have you beside me. And the command is this: don't be afraid. That I'm to respond with love towards you, no matter what's going on in my life. That is the greatest way that I could live my life. That's my purpose. And so, Father, I pray that you would help me to model that to those around me. And most importantly, to those that mean the most to me. May my children and my children's children see in me a love that surpasses anything, a love for you, and that I'll obey and trust no matter what. So that when they experience storms in life, they remember Dad. And they remember how good you've been to their father and grandfather. And they will choose to trust and obey, just like it was modeled for me. Thank you for my family, and thank you for being my God. Amen.
Amen.